They weren't supposed to find it. The ledger buried in bone-dry soil beneath the nursery floor, its pages inked with blood, names crossed out on their 21st birthday. That was the moment we knew. The Aldermore curse wasn't just a legend. It was a contract. There are secrets. And then there are those secrets soaked in centuries of silence, encoded in legacy, and protected by death. This is one of them. Ashwood Manor wasn't just a mansion. It was a monument to control. Built high on the hills of Henrico County, it cast its shadow across generations. But behind its perfect symmetry, imported mahogany, and manicured rose gardens, it held something darker than death itself, a blood pact older than the colonies. Edmund Aldermore arrived in 1682, not with the hunger of a pioneer, but with the precision of a man following instructions. No one questioned why he brought with him ancient books wrapped in animal hide, or why the basement was dug before the walls were raised. But if they had, they might have noticed the floor plan mirrored a sacred geometry, a design used in Babylonian ritual spaces, long lost to time. And what about the eldest son, Thomas, the firstborn to inherit the land? At 21, he drowned in the family well, with both hands tied behind his back. Ruled an accident. The second son, Isaac, suffocated in his sleep. No signs of struggle. And the third, Robert, found impaled on the estate's wrought iron gate at exactly 21 years, 0 months, 3 days. Coincidence? Or was it a trigger hidden in plain sight? For over 200 years, every male Aldermore met death at 21. No war, no plague, no enemy. Just quiet, methodical removal, each a replica of the last. But the truth didn't begin with murder. It began with control. Edmund wasn't building a family. He was founding a dynasty built on blood sacrifice, psychological fracture, and absolute dominion. He needed sons only lows, and enough to train them, to mold them in obedience. But once they reached manhood, once they could claim the estate or question the rules, they became liabilities. And so, they were erased. One generation at a time. They called it a curse. But a curse suggests chaos. This was something else entirely. This was designed. And once you understand why, you'll never see your own family the same way again. Eyes painted just slightly too wide. Lips curled in near smirks, as if privy to some eternal joke. These weren't ancestral tributes. They were warnings. The nursery, painted deep burgundy, had no toys, only books, and not the kind you'd expect. Bound volumes on natural law, domination, sacrifice. One journal, labeled Vox Pater, contained line-by-line behavioral notes on each child, recorded daily by Edmund himself. Thomas questioned my instruction today. Noted. Robert asked why the staff never speak. Noted. Isaac wept during midnight ritual. Weakness. To be corrected. Midnight ritual. You heard that right. Every Aldermore child was awakened at 3:03 a.m., the time mystics call the Devil's Minute, led barefoot into the east wing, and made to kneel in silence beneath a black iron triangle embedded into the stone floor. Above them, a single phrase carved in Latin, Ex tenebris imperium, from darkness, power. These weren't spiritual ceremonies. They were programming events. And the purpose? To break the ego. To fracture the identity. To bend the will until the boy no longer recognized where his fear ended and his father's voice began. By age 10, each son had endured over 700 of these rituals. By 14, they were fluent in obedience. But at 21, something always shifted. It was the age at which Virginia law allowed inheritance, ownership, autonomy. It was the one moment when the chains could snap, and a son might see his father not as master, but as man. That brief window of rebellion was the on, a threat the Aldermore patriarch couldn't allow, so he built the system to terminate them. Right on schedule, This wasn't madness, this was design. A blueprint of obedience that could be replicated, mass-produced, passed down through blood or law or church or school. Because once you understand this, once you see how one man could use ritual, architecture, and fear to eliminate freedom within his own home, you begin to ask, how many other homes were built the same way? And who benefits from obedience? Edmund Aldermore wasn't just a patriarch. He was a priest of control masquerading as a father, and what he created inside Ashwood Manor wasn't a family. It was a closed system of psychological warfare. But here's what most miss. He wasn't acting alone. In 1693, a letter was found hidden inside a hollow stair post, sealed in wax and written in cipher. When decoded, it revealed correspondence between Edmund and a London-based society known only by the initials SCR. Historians dismissed it as nonsense. But if you trace those initials through suppressed shipping logs and buried merchant records, a pattern emerges. The Societas Custodientis Regula, the Society of the Rule Keepers. They weren't loyal to any nation. They answered only to legacy. Their creed? Order through blood, power through silence. Edmund wasn't just building a legacy, he was piloting a prototype. A family line engineered to prove a theory, that true loyalty could only be achieved through trauma, ritual, and erasure of self. And when the sons resisted, when they began to awaken, the fail-safe was always the same. Death at 21. Calculated, controlled, quiet. But here's what chills me to the bone. The society didn't vanish. They evolved, adopted new names, merged with institutions, their methods hidden beneath coats of arms, college crests, and corporate bylaws. Today, we call them by other names: think tanks, policy councils, advisory boards. But the function is unchanged. Preserve the rule. Destroy the exception. And the exception is the man who sees, the man who questions, the man who no longer obeys. You see, Edmund wasn't the last of his kind. He was one of the first modern architects of psychological slavery. The methods he refined inside that Virginia mansion, ritualized surveillance, isolation, controlled reward systems, are now standard across every institution designed to raise men, military boot camps, religious seminaries, fraternity initiations, all shadows of the same original design. The question is, who's still running the experiment? And if the Aldermore line was just one known example, how many others were successful? Quiet, invisible dynasties with no suspicious deaths, no paper trail, just generations of silence. That's the true horror. Not the deaths. The obedience that lives on, and once you understand this, you can't go back. Because now the question isn't what happened in the past. It's this. What system are you trapped in? Right now, you think your home is safe, familiar. But what if the very walls were designed to shape your mind? Ashwood Manor wasn't just a prison. It was a device. Every beam, every brick, every stair creaked with intention. Architects today still can't fully explain how the acoustics of the Aldermore estate worked. Whisper in the west hallway, and it echoed in the nursery. Close a door in the cellar, and the vibrations resonated in the third-floor bedroom wall. But this wasn't faulty design. It was surveillance. Psychological conditioning through sound, symmetry, and subtle dread. Edmund Aldermore believed in control not through chains, but through presence. His sons grew up believing they were always watched, always judged, even in their sleep. And they were. Hidden passages lined the walls, accessible only from the patriarch's study. Small slits in the wainscoting allowed him to see into each room, observe without being seen. But the true weapon was the sound machine. In the attic, beneath a trapdoor sealed with iron nails, a crude pulley system was discovered during the 1987 estate inspection. It was attached to ropes and weighted pipes. When triggered, it created a low, rhythmic hum, barely audible, but constant. It activated each night at 3:00 a.m., and it had one purpose: to disrupt the dream state. Decades before sleep science or REM cycles were discovered, Edmund knew what modern scientists have proven. Interrupted deep sleep destabilizes cognition, erodes emotional resilience, and heightens suggestibility. His sons were kept mentally fragmented, never fully rested, never fully aware, easy to mold, easy to command. You feel that chill running down your spine right now? That's not fear, that's recognition. Because somewhere inside you, you've felt this before. Not in a haunted house, but in a classroom with buzzing lights and no windows. In an office cubicle, where every movement is monitored. In a church where silence is sacred and questioning is sin. These are the children of Ashwood, replicas of the original model. And when we trace the techniques of the Aldermore patriarch forward, through architecture, religion, education, we see the real legacy he left behind, a system of invisible leashes disguised as structure. But now you've seen the blueprint, and seeing it changes you. Because once you realize your safe space was designed to control you, you start asking who's watching you sleep. Power doesn't survive by chance. It survives through ritual, through selection, through bloodlines groomed like military assets. The Aldermore family was not simply cursed. They were crafted. You see, every patriarch of the Aldermore line, from Edmund in 1682 to Franklin Aldermore in 1913, kept the same journal. Not a diary, a manual, passed down like scripture, its leather binding worn, its pages brittle, but its content surgical. Written in ciphered Latin, the book outlined precise protocols. When to isolate a son, how to introduce fear without force, which books to allow and which to burn, when to remove affection, when to reintroduce it to maximize dependency. It was a psychological map of domination. Each male child was logged, indexed, rated on traits like compliance, imagination, and ego resilience. Those with too much inner strength were targeted early. They were either broken or eliminated. But here's the revelation that turns blood cold. The journal didn't originate with Edmund. It predates him by at least 2 generations. Scholars tracing its origins found eerie similarities with inquisitorial training texts from 14th century Spain, used by church enforcers to suppress heretics through psychological torment. Not torture. Conditioning. The methods were repurposed, simplified, rewritten in the language of family. And once inside the home, they became invisible. How many other families across Europe were trained with this code? How many fathers handed it down, calling it tradition, calling it discipline, calling it love? This isn't just the Aldermore story. It's the blueprint of elite bloodlines across centuries. They learned to raise heirs not with care, but with calculation. Because the goal was never freedom. The goal was obedient succession. It's why you see the same behaviors in powerful families today. Ritualized boarding sea, cools, strict lineage marriages, emotional coldness masked as heritage. They're still running the program. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some of you watching this, you've felt it. The sudden withdrawal of love as punishment. The silent rules no one ever says out loud. The unbearable pressure to follow a legacy you didn't choose. That's not parenting. That's programming. And the bloodline doesn't care how you feel. It only asks, will you obey, or will you vanish like the Aldermore sons? They didn't just die young. They died at 21, not 20s, not 22, always 21. To the average man, that seems arbitrary, but to those who understand ancient systems, occult law, legal fiction, Ritual numerology, 21 is everything. It's the threshold of sovereignty. In British common law, the foundation of American legal code, a man becomes legally autonomous at 21. Before that, he is property under guardianship. At 21, he becomes a legal entity with full rights to land, money, and power. That's not coincidence. That's the ritual kill switch. The Aldermore sons weren't removed randomly. They were terminated the moment they crossed the threshold into legal adulthood, the moment they could challenge the patriarch, the moment they could access estate records, revoke signatures, question rituals. In their world, 21 wasn't a birthday. It was a threat. But it goes deeper. In ancient mystery schools, Babylonian, Egyptian, Pythagorean, 21 was a sacred trial age. The initiate who passed 21 trials or reached 21 years of ritual instruction was considered awakened, spiritually, intellectually, and politically dangerous to the high priesthood. You weren't allowed to reach 21 unless you were worthy. The Aldermore line inverted this. The sons were raised in fear, fractured internally, trained to obey until 21. Then, just as the fog might begin to lift, they were silenced. What does that remind you of? Today, 21 is still the last artificial threshold before full adult privilege. The age of legal drinking, full inheritance, government clearance. It's the last gate. But ask yourself, why is everything structured around delaying your adulthood? Why are you still called a minor until 18, but not fully free until 21? Because they're still watching that age, still tracking who wakes up at 21. And the modern systems, they don't need to kill you anymore. They just distract you, sedate you, trap you in college debt, low testosterone, dopamine addiction, algorithmic hypnosis. You're alive, but not awakened. And maybe that's even more efficient, because a dead man can't rebel, but a numb one won't. This is where you start asking dangerous questions, because if 21 was their fear, then what are you becoming that they're so afraid of? By now, you've seen the pattern. But the real question is this: how did they hide it? How did 5 sons vanish at the exact same age across 3 generations? And no one said a word? Institutions. You see, evil doesn't just act, it partners. Edmund Aldermore understood something most men never grasp. If you embed your crimes inside respectable systems, no one looks. The church signed the burial records. The doctors wrote natural causes. The county magistrate, an Aldermore cousin, closed each inquest before it began. The deaths weren't hidden in shadows. They were buried under paperwork. This is how real corruption survives. Not in secret lairs or villain monologues, but in offices, in boards, in rituals with names like due process, compliance, and standard procedure. The institutions we're taught to trust, church, court, school, media, were never designed to liberate you. They were built to domesticate power, to protect lineage, to launder control. Ashwood Manor had 3 chaplains over 70 years. All were members of a private Anglican society devoted not to God, but to legacy preservation. Their sermons trained the Aldermore boys to associate obedience with virtue and questioning with sin. The family physician, Dr. Langdon, wrote in his journal, recovered posthumously, "The boy knew. His eyes were wild, but I gave the tincture. By morning, he was still." He was never charged. In fact, he was honored in the local paper for decades of service. This is what you must understand. Institutions don't protect truth. They protect narratives. And the most sacred narrative in elite bloodlines? Continuity. No scandal, no exposure, no awakenings. If a son must die to preserve the name, so be it. Sound harsh? Look around. How many modern families silence the black sheep? How many schools expel the curious but reward the obedient? How many careers collapse? So after one honest question, these aren't accidents. They're echoes of a program far older than your government, older than your constitution. Edmund Aldermore didn't create the system. He merely perfected it and passed it on. And now you live inside it. Still think this is just history? Ask yourself, when was the last time you obeyed something you didn't believe in, just to keep your place? And who benefited from your silence? Legacy. The word they wrap in gold. The illusion they sell to kings and beggars alike. But beneath that word lies the most powerful weapon of control the Aldermore bloodline ever wielded: identity, as a cage. You see, the sons didn't stay in the system out of fear. They stayed because they were told. They were chosen. Chosen to carry a name. Chosen to protect the honor. Chosen to continue the line. Legacy was not love. It was a mask, one fused to their skin. From their first breath they were told what they were. You are an Aldermore. You are strong. You are silent. You do not question. It sounds noble. It sounds powerful. But it's slavery dressed as destiny. The oldest son, Thomas, wrote a letter, never sent, just days before he died. In it he said, "I look into the mirror and see no face, only my father's will. I do not know what I love. I only know what I must protect." That's not a life. That's a performance. And this is where the rabbit hole turns personal. Because if you're a man today, especially one seeking power, mastery, control, you've been offered the same mask. Maybe it was called family name, maybe heritage, maybe duty, but the result is the same. They gave you an identity before you could choose your own. And when you started to question it, when you felt the friction of your soul rubbing against the story they handed you, they told you it was weakness, rebellion, immaturity. It's not. It's awakening. That's why they must kill it before it becomes fully conscious. Just like the Aldermore sons at 21. So right now, I want you to take this moment and anchor something permanent inside yourself. If this story has lit a fire in your blood, if it's cracked the lens you were given as a boy, then drop a comment below and write, "I bury the mask. I become the fire." Write it twice. Not just for the algorithm, but because repetition locks transvisuntes, formation. You are not here to carry someone else's name. You are not here to obey someone else's map. You're here to remember who you were before the system told you who to be. And that realization, that's the real inheritance they tried to bury. Very system of control has one weak point: the witness who speaks. The Aldermore legacy wasn't just built on ritual, fear, and inheritance. It was built on the silence of those who saw too much, but a few did speak, and every one of them disappeared. Let's talk about Samuel Greaves, the family's most loyal groundskeeper. He served the estate for over 40 years. A man of few words until one drunken night in 1906 he told a travelling priest, "They don't die by chance. The master makes it so. Every firstborn, every time, always at 21. The next morning Samuel was found in the woods, hanged with his own belt. The official report? Suicide by melancholy. But the knot was tied in a sailor's hitch, a knot Greaves had never been trained to use. Then there was Dr. Catherine Lorne, a post-mortem specialist in 1987 who reviewed the Aldermore exhumations when the county ordered preservation work. She noted identical stress fractures in the C1 vertebra, the executioner's vertebra, on 3 separate Aldermore sons. Before she could release her report, her office burned to the ground. The fire marshal called it an electrical fault. But no other office in the building was touched. Coincidence or correction? You have to understand. Systems of psychological control don't just prevent rebellion, they clean up after it. Silencing the outliers keeps the illusion intact. A clean house, a noble lineage, a sacred bloodline. Every whistleblower becomes a madman. Every honest record becomes lost. Every strange death becomes personal tragedy. It's the same pattern you see today. The soldier who exposes friendly fire, the journalist who uncovers political collusion, the scientist who questions the data. What happens to them? Smear campaigns, mysterious accidents, sudden suicides. The mechanism hasn't changed. It's just gotten better at branding the truth as insanity. And here, so's the most twisted part. The longer the lie holds, the more the people themselves defend it. Families turn on their own. Communities protect abusers. Institutions rewrite the story until even the victim doubts what they saw. And in the end, the silence becomes so thick. The truth can't breathe. But you're not suffocating anymore, are you? Because now you've seen the pattern. And once you see it, you can't pretend you didn't. So ask yourself this. Who in your life spoke a truth that made others uncomfortable? And what happened to them? What if I told you the Aldermore family didn't just pass down trauma? They passed down a blueprint for silent warfare. No guns, no armies, no blood in the streets, just absolute control, invisible, elegant, permanent. The kind of war where the victim never knows he's under attack, because he calls his prison home. The modern man is surrounded by a cage made of ideas, soft, polished, decorated in ritual. But make no mistake, it is still a cage. Let's look closer. The sons of Ashwood were never whipped, never beaten in public. But they were isolated, gaslit, micromanaged, and sleep-deprived. They were made to believe their suffering was their fault, that their doubts were sin, that obedience was strength, that survival meant becoming like their father. Sound familiar? Today you don't need a patriarch to dominate a generation. You just need the right inputs. Systems that reward silence, schools that punish curiosity, churches that replace divinity with obedience, social media that turns identity into currency. You see, the sons of the modern age don't need to be killed at 21, because most of them are spiritually dead by 16. Endless dopamine loops. No purpose, no fire, no vision beyond survival. That's not failure. That's engineering. You were taught to trade your rage for politeness, your instincts for acceptance, your dreams for debt. And the enemy, he never raised his voice. He smiled, gave you grades, gave you pills, gave you a phone, and whispered, "Be good. Stay safe. Don't ask." This is the bloodless war, where a man forgets he's a warrior, where comfort replaces conquest, where legacy becomes a leash. And in this war, the dead aren't buried, they're promoted, applauded for never making waves, honored for disappearing into the system with a smile. But you, brother, you wouldn't be here if something inside you wasn't still burning. Still what? Ching still remembering. That fire, that's your inheritance, the part of you they couldn't kill. And now you have a choice. Stay asleep inside the war, or become the man they were afraid you'd grow. Not all of them stayed quiet. There was one son, one whose name was almost erased from every Aldermore record, one who didn't die at 21. Nathaniel Aldermore, the sixth child, born in 1842, the only firstborn who disappeared without a death certificate. The estate claims he fell from the cliffs in the spring of 1863. But there's a problem. No body, no witnesses. And just 2 months later, Union intelligence intercepted a coded letter signed N.A. The contents? A list of Southern family estates tied to occult financing of the Confederate Army. At the top of the list, Ashwood Manor. What happened? Nathaniel saw the pattern. He watched 4 brothers vanish before him, saw the rituals, felt the conditioning, endured the gaslight. But something in him didn't break. It hardened. His personal journal, discovered in a false wall behind the East Wing fireplace in 1987, paints a clear picture. They train us to worship the name. But I see the strings. I see the curse. If I reach 21, I will burn the foundation to ash. And then, on the eve of his 21st birthday, he vanished. No body, no burial, just absence. But what if Nathaniel didn't fall? What if he escaped? There are fragments, old Freemason archives from Boston, a Quaker commune in upstate New York, even whispers in early black liberation circles of a pale-skinned stranger who spoke of blood rituals, secret orders, and the need to break the line. They called him the unnamed heir. His purpose? To dismantle the architecture of obedience from the outside. Now think about that. One man, trained from birth to serve a corrupted bloodline, chose exile over inheritance. He gave up land, power, name, for freedom. He chose truth over tradition. That's not rebellion. That's initiation. You've been trained your whole life to see success as staying inside the system. But the truth? Some bloodlines only survived because no one ever walks away. Nathaniel did. And that single act cracked the illusion. Because once one son escapes the pattern, the curse begins to collapse. So the real question is, will you be the one who stays, or the one who vanishes and becomes unstoppable? Here's what they never tell you about awakening. It comes with a cost. When Nathaniel Aldermore vanished, the bloodline didn't die. It adapted. The system, once wounded, learned to hide deeper, to evolve past death and become something worse, self-regulating. You see, after Nathaniel's escape, the remaining Aldermore patriarchs made one key shift. They stopped relying on murder. They started building internal executioners. Instead of killing the sons at 21, they trained them to kill themselves, psychologically. Guilt, shame, overachievement, crippling self-doubt. Legacy pressure so intense, most broke down before they could rebel. By the 1900s, there were no suspicious deaths at Ashwood Manor, just hollow men in expensive coats. Men who smiled for portraits and died inside by 30. It was efficient, elegant, and invisible. Because the new goal wasn't just obedience, it was preemptive self-destruction. And that system? It's not locked in one family anymore. It's everywhere. Boys today are taught to suppress the fire, not with fear, but with distraction, not with pain, but with performance. Get the degree. Chase the bag. Be a good son. Don't cause trouble. Smile. Nod. Apologize for your masculinity. Fit in. And when that ancient fire starts rising in your gut, the one you can't explain, the one that says there's something wrong with this world, what does the system do? It gives you a pill, an addiction, a diagnosis, a fake purpose, a fake tribe. And slowly, quietly, you start turning the knife inward. No one had to kill you. You were taught to kill yourself. That's the return of the shadow. Not a ghost, not a demon, but the internalized voice of every generation that obeyed instead of fighting back. And if you feel that voice crawling beneath your ribs right now, good, because it means you're standing at the same edge Nathaniel stood on. The moment of decision, where legacy becomes a tomb or a weapon, where obedience ends and authority begins. You don't conquer the curse by shouting into the void. You conquer it by doing what they fear most, claiming your mind, your will, your name. The shadow doesn't go away when ignored. It goes away when you face it. And when you do, you don't just break the curse, you become the reckoning. This is where the story ends, not in the past, but in you. Because if you followed this far, you're not just watching a video, you're standing at a threshold. The same one the Aldermore sons stood before they were silenced. The same one Nathaniel crossed when he vanished from the Bloodline. The same one every man must face when the world he was handed no longer fits the fire inside his chest. So now, let's drop all pretense. You've heard the whispers. You've seen the mask. You've felt the system watching you, shaping you, waiting for you to collapse quietly like the others. But you didn't. You made it here. And that means one thing. You're dangerous now. Not because you're violent, not because you're reckless, but because you see. And sight is the one thing the architects of control cannot allow. They'll try to pull you back with comfort, shame, pride, guilt. They'll call it duty. They'll call it honor. They'll say you owe your name, your lineage, your place at the table. But what they really mean is obey or disappear. You want to know the real curse? It wasn't that the Aldermore sons died. It's that they almost became men and never got the chance to finish. But you? You're still breathing. And that means you have a decision to make right now, right here. Stay asleep. Or step across the threshold, where there's no more approval, no more handouts, no more applause. Just fire. Raw, unfiltered, uncomfortable. But free. Because the man who walks out of the house alone, the man who leaves the name, the script, the legacy behind, he doesn't vanish. He becomes legend. Not one written in books, but in movements, in awakenings, in sons who finally say no more. And if you hear that voice rising in your chest now, if your pulse is thundering and your spine feels like it's remembering something ancient, then speak this aloud and speak it with fire. I bury the mask. I become the fire. I bury the mask. I become the fire. Now, watch what happens. Because the system just felt you wake up, and it's afraid. Welcome, brother. You're not cursed. You're chosen.